Okay, welcome to History on Monday, April 27th. We are going to do our best to finish up our discussions on World War One today. Okay, now, first, before I get into this, I want to talk to you a little bit about your note taking. I hope you're still keeping up with taking your notes, but I also know that um, some of the way that I've written it is trying to be clear to you. So I want you to know that you have complete ability and permission to change words, to use abbreviations. That's what note taking is. So as you're following along, I hope part of my job is to train you to take notes, which real taking notes is not copying exactly what I have, but making sure that you get down important things and write it in ways that jog your own memory. Many of us can remember a lecture just by just a few notes on a piece of paper to remember important things, dates, people's names. So I want you to be copying down the notes, but I also want you to know that there is a little bit of freedom in how you're copying down, that it does not have to be word for word, especially since you have the ability to pause me, look at the screen, and try to figure out the best way to write it down for you. Okay? So I want you to be doing that. Don't get overwhelmed with writing maybe words that I have that you wouldn't necessarily write down that don't make sense to you. You write it down in a way that makes sense in your own notes. Okay? All right, now this first screen, I wanted to illustrate something that I don't think is really well covered when we talk about World War I, is that it truly was a world war. There was fighting in Africa and by Africans. A lot of Africa at the time were colonies. So colonies that were run by England or Germany, and then those countries, England and Germany, then forced those colonies into war for their side. So you had African colonies fighting on the side of the Germans. You also had African colonies fighting on the side of the British. So that is something we don't think about, is the heroics that those people had, and that many of them were treated as less than human. They were treated as, the word is, expendable, meaning that I can use them up. I would rather use the African troops up than use up the German troops. Okay, so they were treated as just not as important. Um, so, and you can see it in their uniforms, which is the pictures that I chose here, which I thought was fascinating. You also have Indian troops. So you've got some here with turbans. The Ottoman Empire was Turkish, and so they had a different kind of dress. I didn't put a picture on here, but I have seen pictures of troops of Scottish soldiers who had kilts. So that's something to look up that would be interesting to see too. I thought this was interesting. I love this one that shows some troops on bicycles beside those on horses. So it wasn't just one type of war. There were people fighting on horses, and I love these because there were people fighting on camels. There was a group, and a lot of these people were from Australia. So you had some from Australia fighting. You also had part of the war going on in China. Japan came in. Germany tried to invade part of China. Japan came in and showed that they were going to fight the Germans on behalf of the Allies. And they were actually given some of that territory from China when the war was over, but it wasn't given by China, it was given by us, which was kind of a little sore spot for China. But so you have fighting in China, you have fighting in Africa, you have fighting everywhere. But yet we have this idea of it just being in England or just being in Germany or remember Belgium. So they went from Germany into Belgium and then into France. But it wasn't just Europe. So I wanted to give you a picture that you've got so many different people fighting, losing their lives, being changed, life being changed for everyone. There's also revolution going on everywhere. In the middle of the war, Russia changes hands. Russia gets taken over by some revolutionaries called the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks kick out the existing government, and then they make a treaty with Germany, and they kind of back out of the war. Russia says, we're changing our government, we've kicked out our leadership, and we're going to back. They make their own treaty with Germany and kind of back out. And so the world is just completely changing in so many different ways. But yet we have this very narrow focus of war in one place. And the trenches, which I've told you is how a lot of the war was fought, is how it was fought in a lot of Europe. In Africa, they didn't have the trench warfare. So it looked different in different places. Okay? Now, before we get into the negotiations and ending of the war, which is what I really want to focus on today, I want to tell you one big thing that happened towards the end of the war that we can identify in some ways with right now, and that is they had to deal with a worldwide pandemic of influenza. Theirs was called the Spanish influenza. Didn't start in Spain, found that out. Started in Kansas. It was named the Spanish influenza because the Spanish were the first ones to kind of talk about it and say, look, what's going on? This is what's going on. No one else really wanted to talk about it because everyone else was keeping secrets because of the war. And so because Spain was the first one to speak out, it was called the Spanish influenza, which was not very well named. So it started in about 1918, started in Kansas. So think about that. We are right in the heat of training troops, sending them to these training camps where they're sleeping in bunks really close together, training together, eating together, spending all their time together. Then we put them on a ship and send them overseas where they're right beside each other in trenches. Okay, so think about what we're having to do right now in all of this distancing, and we've got to keep 6 feet apart so that nothing spreads. Well, that would have been ideal for them, but are they 6 feet apart? No, and so it spreads rapidly. So there were hundreds, I think maybe thousands of cases in this one training camp in Kansas. Then those soldiers were shipped overseas. Then you've got them in trenches and then them being taken by the other side, so then it's spreading to Germany. You've got it in POW camps. You've got it spreading everywhere. Now, back at home, this was something that they were dealing with in the United States as well. And there were quarantine and isolation measures. And the places that did more isolation and more encouraging, and they shut down things too, just like we're doing, had better success of controlling it. So I pulled this. This looks like something we would see now, right? But this was pulled from a newspaper in 1918. All shows, churches are ordered closed to fight epidemic. Wow, that relates directly to us. That's true, right? Our churches, our shows are closed because of this. And then it lists the cases, how many cases are in the state. State and city health board heads may take more drastic steps and close other places. Complain that failure of physicians to report cases handicaps them in their work. Demand for physicians greatly exceeds the supply, so they were needing doctors. Same as right now, right? Now, the difference is we have more knowledge even because of this one in 1918. Some people are using data from this. I have seen the governor of Kentucky compare the 1918 graphs to now and show what happens when you isolate, what happens when you quarantine. So they are using that data, and we have more advanced medical abilities, more advanced sanitation abilities to clean things. But this this kind of goes with the idea of history repeating itself, right? The Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. But as we learn new things, and as I don't think there is the same reason to fear, because we have more knowledge and abilities based compared to what they have because of what they went through. But it's kind of interesting to see pictures that relate to what we're seeing now. So this one down here is our troops getting ready to be sent out, and if you can see closely in the picture, they've all got a face mask on. And then over here, these are nurses from the Red Cross. And if I can show you here, let me show you something. They have taken this picture and been able to colorize it. So watch what happens to this old picture, and then they add color to it. And see, isn't that cool? They've able to take these old black and white pictures and colorize them, and it gives us a little bit more understanding. They were saying that the uniforms are not all the same color, possibly because they didn't care as much, because they were too focused on what needed to be done. And the different colors in the head pieces here show different ranks and who was in charge. So these are nurses from the Red Cross preparing face masks, and they're all wearing face masks at the same time. So I just thought it's neat to share, to have a connection, but I'm not sharing this to cause fear. I'm sharing this to actually cause hope, because of things that people have gone through before. We are actually able to learn more and then not go through the same extreme problems that they go through, that they have gone through. So in that time, there was 50 to 1 million that died from the influenza. That's the whole world, and that was more than double the casualties of death in World War I. So the influenza pandemic in 1918, 1919 actually killed more than the war itself. So that's, and it's forgotten, well, right along with World War I. World War I's forgotten too, but it's forgotten in many ways. Okay. Now, we are drawing to a close. So we are coming into 1918 in our thinking with the war, and there is a revolution going on inside of Germany. So inside of Germany, a new leader is taking over, and they actually kick out Kaiser Wilhelm. So they kick out Kaiser Wilhelm, and the leadership changes, and they come to the Allies, remember, because we have the Central Powers and we have the Allies. They come to the Allies and they say, we want to sign an armistice. We want to stop. Armistice means stop fighting. So we want to stop fighting. So on November 11th, 1919, at 11 a.m., all guns went silent. And that, I think, is the strongest part of that video by the History Bombs, when he's going so fast and he's talking and the video is so full of all that information. Then it gets to the end and everything is completely silent. I just think that is really interesting. And so 11/11 at 11 a.m. and this day eventually becomes Veterans Day. Remember when we read, well, I don't know if it was in the book we read with Grandma Dowdle, but one of the stories, I'm not sure if it was that book or the next one, talks about Armistice Day, and it used to be called Armistice Day until it was changed to Veterans Day. So what we celebrate now as Veterans Day used to be Armistice Day to celebrate the end of World War I. So they agree to stop fighting, but there is no treaty yet, and I want you to understand the timetable here. There's still work to be done. Just because they stop fighting doesn't mean that everything is done. They stop fighting. Troops still have to wait to be approved to be sent home. So they're still over there. Many are still in hospitals and being treated and all kinds of different things. And they're waiting to have a treat. What's the resolution going to be? Okay, so we'll stop fighting, but only on the condition that we have a treaty, figuring out what are the conditions of ending the war. You don't just stop, because you have to decide, okay, what do the winners get? What happens to the losers? What are we going to do? Okay, you don't just say, oh, well, all these people died and now we're just going to stop, because that doesn't solve a problem. It's kind of like when you get in trouble and your mom says you really shouldn't have done that. You say, okay, I'm really sorry. It usually doesn't end there, right? There's usually some sort of a punishment, something coming afterwards, so you realize, so that the behavior changes in the future. Okay, so we have that kind of idea of war too. The big four are the four of the leaders from the Allies. So your picture down here represents the big four that met to determine the treaty. So we have representatives from Britain, Lloyd George from Britain. We have George Clemenceau from France, Woodrow Wilson from the United States, and I can't see this guy's name, but he's from Italy, and I don't remember his name. the guy from Italy. And so they all meet together to discuss what the treaty is going to look like. And they meet in Paris at Versailles. Versailles is a palace. And so they meet, and so it becomes the Treaty of Versailles to try to decide what to do. Well, Wilson comes with a plan. Wilson has been working on this plan for a while, and he has a list of 14 points. Okay? And he believes that all four of these 14 points need to be met for peace, to establish peace. And Wilson's idea is not that we just have peace right now. Wilson is trying to think ahead and what can create a world to where this doesn't happen again. So he wants to try to create a situation to set everyone up to not have war again. So in his 14 points, he talks about not having secret treaties. He talks about not increasing military, which would be kind of a tricky point, right? Would everyone want to agree to that? Not necessarily. He talks about free travel on the oceans. He talks some about what some territories are going to be given to other places. And so he has these 14 points lined out. So they meet, and the way a treaty works is it's a lot about compromise, right? You sit down and it takes a long time, because Wilson doesn't just come and say, okay, here's the 14 points. This is what I think is going to happen. And then those other guys go, all right, let's sign. Do you think that's going to happen? No, you have one guy going, let's start with point one. I don't like point one. The other guy says, I like it, but I would change this. The other guy says, not sure about point one. What does it mean? And then you talk about point one for weeks. And then you throw out point one, and because no one can agree. All right. Remember, we see a little bit of this with the Constitutional Convention. Every time you see a group of people meeting, there's going to be disagreement. There's going to be problems. There's going to be compromise. So they met. What surprised Wilson is he gets to the meeting and he's wanting this peace, and he's also thinking about Germany and how to set them up to where this doesn't happen again, and he knows that they're going to need things. Germany is basically destroyed at this point. They have spent all of their money on the war. A lot of their country has been destroyed, and their economy is going to be tanked after this war, unless we are somehow helping them in some way. So, but when they met, Wilson looks around at the table and everyone there is wanting revenge on Germany. They want to say, well, Germany started it, and so they should have to take full blame. They should have to pay this much money, da 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 da. And I think it surprised Wilson a little bit that they wanted to be so harsh on him, so harsh on Germany. So they start making out this treaty, and it's full of harsh conditions for Germany, and making sure that Germany took the full responsibility for the war. So not only, and we gave them billions of dollars to be responsible for, that they don't have. Not only are they responsible for billions of dollars of damage and for paying back to nations that they don't have, but they have to be shamed into admitting that they have the full blame in the war. So there's shame, there's real economic damage done, there's military damage done because we tell them that they can only have so much of a military. So we reduce their military to a certain amount and say you can't have any more than this many soldiers and this many this. And then the big part of Wilson's 14 points, his big thing, big push, was a League of Nations. And a League of Nations was a group of countries that would get together and have representatives from all their countries, and they would meet and they would hash out the world's problems. So if this country had a problem with this country, then the League of Nations would meet to try to solve it. And then it was meant to be an organization that would kind of prevent future problems in the world. Okay, so future world wars. So he presents that idea, and that's a big part of what he wants to do. So I have my quick description here is that the nations would work together to always seek peace and to seek resolutions and answers to the problems. So Wilson stayed in France for 6 months to establish the Treaty of Versailles with the other big four. And he wins a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in the Treaty of Versailles. He could have sent a representative to go and kind of hash these out for him, but he didn't. He went himself. So that was a lot. That was a toll that he was taking on his health and his body being over there for 6 months. So then, but he comes back, Congress, and particularly one or two people that really wanted to work against Wilson. Congress says, we don't like this. We don't like the League of Nations. The League of Nations is a little threatening because it takes your power as a nation away and puts it in the hands of everybody. And so the United States was like, this is a little scary. We don't want to give up our power to one group that's going to be making the decisions. And Wilson, a lot of historians think that Wilson's mind was ahead of his times too much to bring Congress along with him and the world along with him because everyone was scared of everybody else. And then he starts, so what does he do? He takes his case to the American people. He gets in a train and he travels all across the United States, speaking in over 20 places in 3 weeks and presenting his case to the people, hoping that the people will kind of put pressure on Congress to vote for the League of Nations. But he encounters a lot of people, there's a lot of immigrants and people from different backgrounds that feel differently about the war. German Americans don't feel like German was treated completely fairly at the end of the war. There's all kinds of different thoughts behind it that he is facing. And so and after 3 weeks, Wilson has a stroke because it was too much. He had been over in France for 6 months working on his treaty. Then he comes over here and travels all over the United States trying to get people to follow his idea. He has a stroke. We talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, or a few times ago. He returns to the White House, and his wife is basically helping him and helping figure things out. The Congress is saying, look, if you change this one little thing, if you make this adjustment, tweak this, then we'll vote for it. Wilson said, no, it's either everything that I've laid out or nothing. So he would not accept any negotiations, and Congress wouldn't accept it fully as he had it laid out. So there's a question there. Remember, I've said this is a trait I've admired in some presidents, to not go back on what they believe is right. But it can also be a fault, can it, if you are not willing to compromise and get some good for some change in your idea? There's a little bit of pride involved, or a lot of pride involved in not accepting a compromise. So I still haven't decided in my mind if this is a good trade or a bad trade. And I think you can't really call it that. I think it lies somewhere in the middle. I think we have to be willing to work with other people and sometimes not get all of what we want. But at the same time, when you are standing next to a principle that you believe in, there should not be any compromise. So it's a little tricky. So I guess the thing comes to what is considered something that I should absolutely not compromise on. So I guess that would go to what I believe about the gospel. I do not compromise on who Jesus Christ is and what he has done for me. But if I believe that maybe, like, take it to teaching, if I believe I should teach in this certain way, but someone wants me to add this little bit to it, is that not a way that I could compromise? Probably so. That I'm not compromising beliefs that are life or death. So it's a little tricky balance to find there. So anyway, he goes back. He's sick. His body is weak. His mind is still strong, but he refuses to take any negotiations. Congress never signs the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles is signed by the others, and very, very harsh conditions are imposed on Germany. We come up with our own treaty with Germany, kind of on the side, but it's never the Treaty of Versailles. A League of Nations is formed, but United States does not participate in it for a long time, okay, for a couple decades. We don't participate in it, but there is one. Now, we are going to come back to this because when we get into World War II, this creates the perfect breeding ground for another war because Germany has its feelings hurt. Germany is destroyed. It's the perfect breeding ground for a leader to rise up and say, I have the answers. We have been treated wrongly, and we need to be strong as a nation. We need to be proud as a nation. We have been destroyed, and we should not be destroyed, and we have the right to be proud of who we are. And someone does rise up, and who is it? His name is Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler probably would not have had the ability to have the power he did if World War I had not ended this way. But because of the way this ends, it does not keep us. It is not the war to end all wars. It's actually the war that creates another war in some ways. Interesting, huh? Okay, now today I'm going to leave you with this. Our hats off to a few heroes. Here's a few heroes that I want to mention before we end our talk, okay? And then you'll find in the email I sent this morning a couple other websites to go to that mention some more heroes and more about the role that animals have played in the war, which is, I don't want to ignore people who have, but there's hundreds, thousands. There's no way to know them all. But it is cool to read individual stories of heroism because it's inspiring to hear what normal people are able to do. Okay, Alvin York. I grew up hearing about this guy because he's from Tennessee. And he was just this country bumpkin who went over. He had been a new Christian. And he goes over and he's actually responsible for capturing this whole group and making them prisoners in this attack against Germany. And you know how he does it? By his turkey call. He's a good shot in Tennessee, and he surprises everyone with how good of a shot he is, and he tricks this army by his turkey calls. Really cool. He's cool to read about. There's also a movie about him, and I know you can get it off of YouTube. You may have to maybe rent it, but I know you can find it. It's called Alvin York. Really cool black and white movie. Okay. The Red Baron. Now this is from the other side. This is a German, but he was a flying ace, and he He was called the Red Baron, and he had more flying victories and shots than anyone else. Jack Cornwell, I just learned about him. He was the youngest to receive the Victoria Cross, which is a medal for bravery, and he was 16. And in the Battle of Jutland, he continued fighting even though he was wounded, and the rest of his group was pretty much dead or injured, and he continued fighting to the very end. But he was killed in that battle. Many times, the people who receive these honors receive them what we call posthumously, which means after they died. They're actually given to the family for their heroism. Edith Cavell, love this lady. She was a nurse, and she helped 200 Allied soldiers escape. She was caught by the Germans and executed. And because of this, a lot of people kind of rallied around this idea that Germany was these evil people and helped people kind of have an ability to fight after this happened to her. She also had a little dog, Jack, that stayed with her everywhere and kind of helped her. Cher Ami, now this is a non-human hero that is a pigeon that was known to deliver a message that saved a division of soldiers. They were kind of lost in the woods, and they were being fired on by their own side. The Allies were starting to fire on them, and they were like, no, you don't know. We're you. Stop firing on us. And so they sent Cher Ami with this message. She was a carrier pigeon. She carries it through being shot at. She loses a leg. She has a chest wound. She's blind in one eye when she arrives at the station. But she delivers the message, and the shooting stops. Isn't that cool? And so her body is preserved, stuffed, in the Smithsonian Museum, and someone even made a little wooden leg for her. She survived the war. So pretty cool. Think about carrier pigeons being used in the war and how they would be actively shot at. The enemy is not just going to let a pigeon fly above them if they know what it's for. They're going to try to shoot them down too. So think about that. And there was also a dog, I think his name was Stubby, that was given a medal for his, I think what he did was detect gas. There were also dogs kept in the trenches to catch rats and kill the rats that were in the trenches. So animals were used a lot in the war. So for the comments below, what I want you to do is go to a couple of those sites that I gave you this morning and find out about another hero or another type of animal that was used in the war and tell us about it below in the comments. Okay, so just read about someone's story or some animal story and let us know a little bit about it below.